why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm Lisa Austin. I'm with MnDOT in the Metro District in an office called the Center for Community Connections. And I am the chair of this research council, which is transportation planning and the economy. Um, Welcome all today. I'm really excited about this topic. It's something that I deal with from time to time, so I'm interested to share what we're learning and hear all of your questions. Before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit of background about the Center for Transportation Studies councils. The councils provide a way for professionals and researchers to get together and meet each other and exchange information and share ideas on transportation issues and trends. And it brings together university faculty and staff with the practitioners and public and private sector folks to help recommend the direction of research in the future and provide the center's research, education, and engagement programs. So with that, you can see on the screen there's a little more information. Today's webinar topic is Asphalt Art and Aesthetics, Research Guidance and Community Impacts. The presentations will feature several experts and detailing some of their work. And before we go into any more details on that, I'm going to pass it over to Paul Morris, my vice chair. Why don't you introduce yourself and go through some housekeeping stuff? Thanks, Paul.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, my name is Paul Morris. I'm a director at SRF Consulting Group, where I lead our policy and system studies. And we're very excited to have you with us. So thank you for joining to hear about this topic here. Just a couple housekeeping things for our webinar here today. We will have the question and answer feature in the Zoom platform here. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, we will monitor for those. And as time allows for the individual presentations, we'll just do a quick check if there's any technical clarifying questions and try to get touch on those as each speaker wraps up. However, we look forward to a more robust and interactive question and answer time at the end of all the presentations here. And so you're welcome to continue to type your questions at that time or request to be unmuted and offer your question verbally here. This event is also eligible for 1.5 hours of both PE and AICP credits here. So if you'd like a certificate for that, please do a chat to all panelists and we can make sure to get you that information. Lastly, we want to give a special welcome to any students that are joining us here today. CTS does like to keep track of students that are involved. And of course, this is a great way to get some exposure with practitioners in the industry here. So we invite students to put their name and information in the chat here, just so we can get a tally of who's attending. So thanks to you, back to you, Lisa, to introduce our panelists.
Great, thanks, Paul. So like I said before, this topic's interesting to me, and as we thought about presenting it for this council, this is transportation planning and the economy. We will get into some technical things and traffic safety issues, but really when people are looking to put this type of application in their communities, they're seeking to support the economy and create a sense of place. So communities across the country are increasingly turning to this kind of thing, and we're seeing lots of questions about it. So the MUTCD, people have probably heard of that. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices has recently been updated. So it opens a window to a little more opportunities to do this kind of thing following their guidance. And new research on pavement art accessibility and pedestrian safety are also taking place. So this is an important time to kind of learn about what's emerging in this area. So the webinar brings together all this research and practitioners to share some of this kind of stuff. And the panelists will highlight research done by the local research board, MnDOT's progress on developing a technical memorandum on asphalt aesthetics for state highways. And we're sharing some research on ADA accessibility in relation to this kind of treatment. And then we'll have a discussion from a recent study of pedestrian level of traffic stress in Cook County, Illinois. So all these will reflect on the community's interest in advancing asphalt art projects. So excited about this project, this presentation today. So our speakers are Ethan Peterson with Minnesota Department of Transportation in State Pavement and Marking Crashworthy Engineer. Chris Sagsveen, he's an engineer and project director of safety and research at SRF Consulting. Shirley Liu is a researcher in the Accessibility Observatory at the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies. Jenny Mines is a manager of healthy living, manager in the Healthy Living team in the City of Minneapolis Health Department. And Nicole Morris is a research associate professor and director of Human Factors Safety Lab in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Minnesota. So we've got an excellent panel here. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Ethan. He'll start us off and talking a little bit about MnDOT's work and the MUTCD. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. Let's see here. Get my screen up. Well, I will start off by saying good morning to everybody, and I really appreciate the chance to present for this group. As Lisa brought up, there's a new manual on uniform traffic control devices, and what I'm going to kind of dive into is where did aesthetic surface treatments really start getting talked about? What's the evolution of that in the MUTCD? Because, the 2009 version says some things about it, and then the new 11th edition also kind of expands on that. And I'll get into that. That's in my slides. I shouldn't get too far ahead of myself here. So let's see here. Let's get in. So right away, what are definitions? Before we talk about anything, we should really know what it means, right? So what are the key definitions of core philosophy here? Really, the big thing that kicked us all off was colored pavement. Colored pavement kind of brought up this sense of aesthetic surface treatment earlier on, but it is a completely different thing. A colored pavement is a road paving material, paint, or surface treatment used to communicate regulations, warning, or guidance, or that incorporate retroreflectivity. So the key difference here is that it's used as a traffic control device. Um, and then the aesthetic surface treatment. What are these? These are treatments like brick, pavers, or patterns used for purely aesthetic reasons that are not intended to communicate with road users. So big thing here, it is not a traffic control device. The core philosophy consistent across both the old MUTCD and the new one is that any color or pattern that functions as a traffic control device must comply with the MUTCD standards, and aesthetic surface treatments are allowed only if they do not interfere with, degrade the contrast of, or obscure official traffic control devices. That's a really big theme you'll see as we go here. So this is a little busy, but I wanted to bring up how we got here. And the big thing here is the 2009 National MUTCD. As you can see, I snipped the section for colored pavement because this is where it all started. And you can take some time to read that if you like. But the big thing here is that it really brought up the discussion of what a colored pavement was, the traffic control device side of things. And then if you can see that second paragraph, it discusses some colored pavement, some non-retroreflective colored pavement that include bricks and other types of patterns, if used, that are purely aesthetic. So this kind of brought up some questions to everybody as they read through this and thinking about it like, oh, how can we apply things like that? So as people explored that, FHWA actually came out with some interpretations for the application. As you can see here, I linked I referenced the numbers of the FHWA interpretations. The first one was the application of colored pavement. And really, as you can see there, the treatment must be purely aesthetic in application that does not attempt to regulate, warn, or guide traffic, or otherwise communicate with any roadway user. It must also be devoid of retroreflective properties. That's a big one. So acceptable treatments they talk about in these interpretations, they have to be subdued and utilize earth tone colors. So red, rust, brown, clay, or equivalents. And that's kind of changed as the MUTCD is expanded on traffic control device colors in the future. But this is kind of where it started, right? The initial discussion. And then where does that take us to now? Um, the MUTCD 11th edition standard here, I've referenced the chapter that really goes into colored pavement. The more specific section is there's actually an aesthetic surface treatment section in there as well. As you can see here in the 11th edition, the aesthetic, it became a lot more objective, talked a little more about it. There's a room that you got to work in for this, right? So the big thing is that the color used for purely aesthetic treatments have to be outside of the chromaticity coordinates that are defined by the feds. So there's a bunch of colors, right? We're all familiar with white, yellow, green, red, purple, blue, and there's a list of other ones that the MUTCD calls out. So we can't use those colors in aesthetic surface treatments. And this just ensures that it's never mistaken for an official traffic control device. Like before, a retroreflectivity, it has to be devoid of that completely. So no glass beads or anything in the pavement markings there. Interference, they also talk about how aesthetic surface treatments really shall not interfere with traffic control devices or confuse pedestrians, especially those with visual disabilities who rely on tactile cues. And that's kind of a portion of this webinar as well as we move forward. The crosswalk patterns shall not be designed to encourage road users to remain in crosswalks, engage or interact with the pattern, or otherwise inhibit safe crossing. So that's kind of the guidelines for that. How do we move forward with all of this? And that's the really big thing, right? So as Lisa alluded to, MnDOT is working on a technical memorandum right now to address policy for MnDOT roadways on how aesthetic surface treatments can really get used, or and defining the process on how that would work. We're aiming to have that finished by early to mid next year. I think we're almost there. We just need to get it through the tech memo process, which could take some time. So hoping we can get through that sometime quick, and then we can get it to this group, really get it out there, disseminate it amongst everything. I didn't want to bring too much up because there's a lot to it, and I will say that it's going to be pretty restrictive. Like this last bullet says, we're not going to allow aesthetic surface treatments on MnDOT roadways in crosswalks. We're just really concerned about that interaction with people who have visual disabilities and how they interact with them, because contrast is a really huge thing for them, and there's a large percentage of population that suffer from some version of visual disability. So we really are driving a research project to look at this more closely, and Nicole Morris will dive into that later. So this just kind of cues things up for the future, or for these next presentations. And with that, I guess I want to say thank you and see if anybody has, I guess we were gonna, I think, take questions afterwards if there were quick technical brush ups. Seeing, hearing none, I guess I'll give it to Chris.
All right. Thank you, Ethan, and thank you for the chance to be here today. Again, my name is Chris Sagsveen. I'm a project director and engineer at SRF Consulting in the safety and research group. And so a lot of my work is delving into local research board activities. So today, some of the talking points. So I'll just give a quick overview of the Local Road Research Board, or LRRB. For those who don't know exactly what it is, I'll just take a quick moment there. the project overview of this particular project, and then there is a report that's done, but it's not yet published. We're just we're just finalizing that now. And so for today's purposes, I'm going to focus on the frequently asked questions portion of the report and key themes and takeaways. All right, so as I said, we'll get into a quick overview of what LRB is. Go to the next slide. So the Local Road Research Board was established in 1959 in Minnesota, right at the time that the state aid system was established. And thankfully, they had the foresight back then to create a board like this to conduct research with a focus on local roads, meaning city and county, and really with the goal of improving the design, construction, maintenance, environmental conditions for our citizens. Each year, city and county screening boards recommend how much of their state aid funding to allocate to the board. And the latest LRB budget was about $4 million, which yields about 25 new projects each year. And there's about 75 active projects underway. And there's a main local road research board that oversees this, and then a research implementation committee that that oversees most of the work that we do, which is more of the taking the research and really implementing it into boots on the ground type projects. This project in front of you today was a implementation committee project. So this next slide, this is a lot going on here, but the bottom line is each fall we solicit new project ideas, and we meet with MnDOT district pre-screening board meetings where we solicit ideas from city and county engineers, where just talk about what are some areas that they want research done and how can we apply that to make their lives easier. And then each year there's new prioritization and voting to come up with projects. And that's how this current project came up a few years ago, because there was enough interest to really want to evaluate the pavement art on public roadways topic. So we'll move forward to the project purpose. Next slide, please. All right, so as was already said, pavement art on public roads is becoming increasingly more popular, and you'll hear more about how these projects can, and how there's testimonies, how these projects can transform streets into vibrant public spaces, foster community engagement, encourage active transportation, and support some traffic calming effects too. The challenge that many agencies have, and probably a main reason for your being here today, is as already kind of pointed out, current policies and regulations are often maybe unclear and inconsistent. So how do we get a handle on that? And really helping agencies to feel, knowing about what's the right thing to do when you want to move forward on these types of projects. Okay, move to the next slide. To address these gaps in understanding, and we assembled a team of experts to help us do the following. We reviewed and synthesized best practices for pavement art in the right-of-way. We analyzed existing policies and technical guidance that we were able to find, such as the MUTCD. We surveyed local agencies across the state and across the nation to see who's doing what. And finally, we brought everything together in a report that will probably be ready fairly soon for your view. So today's just about giving an overview of what's in that report. So the technical advisory panel was a pretty good cross section of people across the state here. Randy Newton was the chair from St. Paul. And Ethan Peterson, who you just heard from, and Lisa Austin, they were both part of the team. And so we're very thankful for the time that they put into this and helping us address, well, what are the questions and how did we want to tackle this? When we move into the next slide, let's see, let's see here, project deliverables. Yeah. So this is as I said before, I wanted to touch on the FAQs and the key themes and takeaways. And to begin with, what are we talking about? What did this project focus on? And it really was about pavement art on public roads. And that was the focus. Specifically, painted artwork, maybe applied by an artist directly to the roadway surfaces, such as within intersections, mid-block areas, and bump outs. The definition for our purposes did not include artwork on vertical elements, such as bridge abutments or retaining walls, or other right-of-way elements outside of the roadway. Are there state or federal rules or regulations to guide agencies on implementation of art? And there are no specific state or federal guidelines or regulations that prohibit pavement art, but there are some important guidelines to consider. First, the MUTCD, which you already heard a little bit about from Ethan, is the main one. And it governs traffic control devices such as pavement markings. It does not directly regulate pavement art, but it sets boundaries that agencies must follow. And because, as Ethan said, because it can be interpreted as a traffic control device and needs to conform to MUTCD standards for colors and shapes and so on, it's really important to seek the source and look at that information in Part 3 of the MUTCD. Another question was, well, I guess it was about awareness of the Visual Artists' Rights Act, or VERA. That was part of this as well. Certain types of art, such as paintings, drawings, prints, and sculptures are protected by VERA. However, the focus of VERA generally excludes art directly for purposes like this on a roadway. So MnDOT has more information in there on a policy that they have on art on trunk highway right-of-way. And it's a good example of what those VERA rights mean and are. And then finally, are there other pavement guidance out there? And we reference in our report the Asphalt Art Guide created by Bloomberg Associates and Street Plans Collaborative. And it provides some practical recommendation and directions. There's a lot of examples of successful art projects in cities across the nation. And if nothing else, I think it's a good place to start for those who are really curious. Okay, next slide. Another question was, where is it appropriate to install pavement art on public roads? And basically includes areas such as median bump outs and central islands of roundabouts. We found some general considerations that agencies should be aware of, and have a list there that it must not conflict with the primary purpose of the roadway markings, which you've already heard about. Evaluate the roadway context. Roadway operations and geometry should be considered. Be aware of the MUTCD language, reflective crackings, all the things you've already heard about from Ethan. The next slide we have another question: where is it appropriate to install pavement art on public roadways? And The art could obscure critical traffic control markings, create driver distraction or confusion, and adversely impact pedestrian and bicycle safety. And some of those artwork treatments may reduce pavement surface friction. So that was another thing that came up. So I think the bottom line here is that there is flexibility for agencies to support community art, especially in non-driving areas. You know, must not conflict with the primary purpose of the roadway markings. And design decisions should be made carefully with professional judgment, considering those the context and the MUTCD standards. I'm going to move on to the next slide where it's just more of a summary of other FAQs. For the sake of time, I won't spend a lot of time on these, but these are questions we also addressed in the report, such as, is there information on how pavement art impacts safety or driver behavior? There's limited conclusive research on this, but there have been positive outcomes such as slower speeds and enhanced community engagement. And as I mentioned, that Asphalt Art Guide has some examples. How long do pavement art installations last? You know, this is going to depend on whether it's temporary or permanent. But there are some examples like Chalk Fest in Maple Grove, Minnesota. It's really only there for a weekend. Others are much more permanent. What steps should be considered for an agency to implement art in a roadway? And in the report, we've provided some common steps or considerations, really considering, well, are you wanting to actively participate in with organizations installing artwork, or do you want to regulate it through a permit program? So we give a little bit of a range in there. And then are there examples of model policies or programs? We have about 9 examples in our report, which are across Minnesota and the nation. So you can easily look in there to see how it relates to your condition. And with regard to environmental impacts, there's a small section in there really that touches on, you know, things that we're familiar with, such as paint wash off and anything that might get into the storm system. Okay, so with regard to key themes and takeaways, and really as I wrap some of this up, many agencies do not have, well, let's just back up. When it comes to the structured art program, many agencies do not have formal programs, but they consider requests kind of on an ad hoc basis. But several agencies defer to local arts organizations or community groups for vetting, funding, or maintaining artwork. And then the few agencies like MnDOT, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Indiana have policies in place, and the report has links to those for some easy reference. When it comes to funding, funding typically comes from local funds, state or federal grants, community contributions, or economic development budgets. Regarding the review and approval process, there's a range of processes there. And as I've already mentioned, formal permitting by boards or staff to informal case-by-case considerations. I already said a lot about safety and compliance, considering MUTCD. There have been some reported accidents or lawsuits out there related to artwork, so more of an awareness. I don't know the details of those. This is something that we came across. Public engagement, feedback. Many agencies have reported positive feedback from their community, especially for art that celebrates local identity or cultural events. There's been reports of agencies wanting or public wanting to make ongoing or temporary artwork more permanent. So it's kind of all over the board in terms of how the public feels. When it comes to maintenance, most agencies do not maintain artwork directly. typically responsibility of the artist or event organizer under permit conditions. Temporary installations are often just led to fade naturally, or some are even required to be removed after the event. So as this practice continues to evolve, there's a need for more coordinated research and documentation to help agencies and communities navigate these complexities. All right, so I am almost done. I just wanted to share briefly what we're currently studying. You know, we have everything. This is a new list of projects underway. As I said, this kind of shows how how the current project came to being. These other projects came to be in the same way. And there's an interest form QR code if any of these strike you as something you want to be participate in. And then my last slide, next slide, there's also a QR code if there's interest in other future projects. So I thought I'd throw those on there if there's something else you'd like studied. But any questions, my contact information is there as well. So that was what I had. So thank you for that time today.
All right, very good. Thank you, Chris. I do see that a couple of questions were entered in the Q&A section here. However, as I kind of read through those, I see that they are kind of substantive questions that probably warrant additional discussion and input from all the panelists here. So Chris, if it's okay with you, I think I'll just hang on to those, and then when we get to the Q&A section at the end, we'll invite a broader discussion on some of those topics. So
all right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, I will just go ahead and share my screen. Give me a minute. Oops, give me a minute. Everyone see my screen okay? Okay, so I'm gonna get started. Yeah, thank you. My slides. So very interesting presentation from Ethan and Chris on the public and regulatory side. So here I'm gonna more switch gear a little bit and focus more on the broader picture of pedestrian experience in the built environments from the applied research angle to share our ongoing work in accessibility observatory on the pedestrian level traffic stress and how it connects to active transport access. I'm sure there will be some synergy we could explore to pavement crossing art, which I'm going to talk about as well. But I want to start with the concept of access and accessibility. It is a broad concept and can mean different things in different contexts. So in our work in Accessibility Observatory, we are working, within the multimodal transport access framework. So it is about, how easily people can reach places they value. It can be measured as, a form of travel time from origin to destinations. So when we focus on like walking, we look at pedestrian access, which we measure the extent to which the built environment supports walking access to destination and services of daily life. For example, in Accessibility Observatory, we calculate like walking access to job annually in our National Accessibility Evaluation Project. So this map I'm showing here is the Mac-Council region profile. So overall, this access matrix, we see in terms of walking access to jobs can reflect population economic activity centers, which tend to cluster at the city center. But this map shows we measure walking as if all streets are equally accessible for people to walk on. But we also know this is not true. Not all streets are created equal. So our goal is that we want to like take a step forward to do like more like safety informed access measurement to better characterize like supportive and comfortable environment for walking. To advance this conversation, we land the concept of level traffic stress, which is a framework for evaluating, how comfortable and safe pedestrians and bicyclists feel when traveling along roadways and crossing intersection with existing facilities and traffic conditions. So this concept is, first developed and studied by an engineering professor to, capture the bicycle level traffic stress for cyclists when traveling along the streets. It is a pretty mature concept and gained its popularity in the last decade for planning communities. And in recent years, the concept has been, borrowed to describe the level traffic stress for pedestrians. So which is our primary focus for today's topic. So what is pedestrian level traffic stress, or we name it PTLTS? It is a simple scoring system from 1 to 4. So PLTS 1 represents streets that feel safe and comfortable for everyone, even for little kids or older adults to walk on. But as stress level rises, walking becomes like less safe and comfortable, and probably requires more like vigilance to the surrounding traffic. That PLTS 4, it is high stress, meaning that it is uncomfortable and unsafe to most users, and most people might simply like avoid walking altogether. So what type of like roadway design or feature that could impact PLTS? So in 2024, the Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety published a report about a standardized approach to describe the pedestrian level traffic stress at the street segments and crossing level. So PLTS is influenced by like many street design feature and traffic factors. For example, like for walking along a street segments, speed, traffic volume, or the presence and width of the sidewalk could matter the most. For crossing experience, it is about like the speed, the presence of signals and or other like traffic control or calming system, right? Like also how many lanes people are crossing and other safety feature like, for example, the pavement or curb extension or crossing island, for example. So these are all the detail like shape, whether a street can make people feel comfortable or intimidating to walk on. So one key question we face is like, do we actually have the data like ready to measure pedestrian comfort or stress at this level? The data I mean is like for all the relevant like spatial feature or traffic factor that we just talked about that's gonna impact the pedestrian experience. I guess the short answer is no. Like throughout investigation, it's pretty surprisingly rare to find like well-maintained or consistent data for pedestrian infrastructure. So even if it exists at the local level, it's in a really smaller scale within the jurisdiction in the particular corridors, right? And the detail elements we need for like describing and capturing the pedestrian experience are not enough. For example, we simply just cannot find any like local network data with like sidewalk or buffer width attributes. So without doing any like specific field work, right? So also for measuring access to destination, which is our work's focus, we need a well-connected street network for routing analysis. These are all the important challenges we encounter as we try to quantify the stress levels and access evaluations. But we have learned there have been like more and more efforts at the federal, state, or local level to address this type of challenges. So one of the working group I'm showing on the screen here, we follow closely is this National Collaboration on Bicycle Pedestrian Accessibility Infrastructure Data group led by a crowdsourced community leaders, including the US DOT and state agencies. So they're working towards to develop a standardized data specification for pedestrian and bike infrastructure. So I guess I will encourage anyone who is working on this type of data to participate and contribute to define the data specification for those active transport infrastructure. But until then, like we would turn into like existing data that allowed us to do the analysis, right? And we have been like leveraging OpenStreetMaps. For those who is unfamiliar with this platform, this is an open source global mapping database providing like detailed street network around the world. And the slides I'm showing as a sample here is the OpenStreetMap's street level data, which you can see includes spatial feature like sidewalk, cycleway, and traffic lanes, et cetera, et cetera. It provides like good enough data for us to working like towards developing this OSM-based PLTS scoring system and conduct like pedestrian routing access through this PLTS informed network. So this is a pilot project. We partner with Cook County DOT in Illinois, which is home to City of Chicago. So we are able to show an example, how we can translate this data into meaningful like planning tool to inform pedestrian planning. So building within the scope of like the data OpenStreetMap, we can like characterize streets into different stress level profile. But not every road is suitable for walking. So defining a non-walkable roadway might seem intuitive, but it is actually not as straightforward from the data standpoint. But for our analysis, for example, we typically exclude like roads where pedestrians aren't allowed, like expressways, or roads like where access is private or doesn't serve like pedestrian routing purpose specifically. So this step ensure that our PLTS network, only reflect realistic walking routes. Then the next couple slides, I will show a couple examples of like street profiles in different stress level to give you a sense like what they look like. First, for the sidewalk segment, so the basic street level feature that we use to describe PLTS include like sidewalk presence, buffer, speed limit, number of lanes, and roadway types. So let's take a look at the example of like what low stress streets look like. First is an example of a typical like residential street with sidewalks along low speed roads, which may look like maybe a neighborhood street that you live on. They are typically like safe and comfortable to walk on. And the second streets here, you see it has sidewalks along a relatively like low speed and low traffic roadway, which we will categorize this something also like low stress or PLTS level 2. Even it's like a little bit high speed compared to residential streets. Another example here is the sidewalk segment that is along a median speed, 2-lane traffic on one side of the arterial road. It is not very comfortable for people to walk on, and this type of street we will typically categorize as PLTS 3, like median stress. So all the three examples here reflect the fact that pedestrian experience on the sidewalks is highly impacted by the adjacent traffic roadway, and we are able to take those into account when we are doing this PLTS categorization for streets. So next, we're going to look at the crossing. So the factor we consider for PLTS include like any kind of traffic control system, like whether there are traffic signals or stop signs, and like traffic calming application, including like crossing, marking, curbs, islands, or raised crosswalk. So the first example here I show like it's a pretty intuitive like low stress crossing environment, right? So the crossing is on a low stress residential streets, and it has stop signs and also a really nice like crosswalk pavement and markings. While the other example reflects more like a medium stress crossing, it is signalized, but with like more than 5 lanes of the traffic roads. So note here that we have not like include like pavement or aesthetic art application as attribute for the level of traffic stress. Like part of it's because of the data, right? But as I hear like Ethan's and Chris' presentation, I think the synergy here we could explore is a question thinking like where is the good place to install pavement art in crossing, right? And then like how pavement art will interact with this like existing crossing attributes and PLTS level. Like does it make sense to like install art at already high stress locations, and whether it will become a form of distractions or it will help ease the traffic in some area, or crossings with or without traffic signals. So I'm sure other panelists here can bring in more expertise from the safety and traffic standpoint. But looking back to our big picture, our work, we are developing more like a generalizable method, working with relatively consistent data to characterize this low and high stress streets for every single streets network for all different places. And we have developed the methods and to do this analysis like with support from the Cook County DOT. So this map here, I'm showing the PLTS network profile for a part of City of Chicago. So the green corridor here reflect the low stress network, while the red highlight the high stress streets. So this stress streets can become a barrier for access because people would typically like reluctant to or maybe they will try to avoid entirely to walk on those high stress streets. For example, if those corridor or streets, they are like important connection to like many essential destination, then this may become a problem, right? Because many people may have to like walk on those stressful street to get to destination. Then there would be some like safety and economic development concerns. So this type of analysis will help. It could help like planners, practitioner to pinpoint, where like small design changes could like help reconnect the neighborhoods and places, and also like standardized data produce like consistent outcome. So we can do this type of analysis to like other cities and other places and possibly make some comparisons and things. So next step we will move on to the McAllister region in our work as well. So using the PLTS and access framework, so the goal of Cook County, our long-term partner, is to be able to use this type of analysis and tool to help identify like a location that is high stress and to prioritize infrastructure improvement. It also, provides a way to evaluate accessibility before and after interventions. And this measure, can fit into performance management, like for pedestrian, and also link investment in the pedestrian network to broader economic health and safety outcome for communities. So this is all I have today, and thank you. Feel free to ask questions or email me after if you are curious about our work too. Thank you. So I guess I will hand over to Jenny next, or
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute here to pull up my slides. Okay. Hopefully you can see that now. So again, good morning. I'm Jenny Mines with the Minneapolis Health Department, and I had the pleasure of working on a street demonstration project that included pavement paint and bollards the last 2 years in the Little Earth and East Phillips neighborhood in the urban core of Minneapolis. And so for today's discussion, I'm focusing primarily on the community engagement approach and all the partnerships that were involved in getting this project completed. And I'm also specifically focusing on one component of the demonstration project, which was pavement painting at a mid-block crosswalk, and how we accomplished this with many partners, including the city's public art department, Public Works, and the University of Minnesota research team through a research award from MnDOT. So just like if you're wondering why public health is here presenting at this table, we do have a role in transportation and active communities because we really do want to create these activity-friendly places where people live. So one way that we do that is through working to change the built environment, streets, parks, et cetera, and that increases people's sort of ease in physical activity and movement in their daily life. So my team at the health department is really focused on chronic disease prevention, and so being active, walking, biking, rolling, and moving as part of your kind of everyday life, not just your leisure, is super important and a critical part of preventing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. And I will just say the project that I'm highlighting today was made possible with funding from the CDC, really with that overall goal of increasing physical activity, specifically in the Native American community. And so I would just put a plug in for anybody on the webinar that if you're looking for partners in the work, please think of public health and our mutual interest. So to get going on the community engagement for a pavement painting project, here is really a summary of the process that we went through, and I will be sharing some tips and lessons in the following slides. I'll walk through each of these steps in detail. Just to call out, the photo on the right is from the Native Youth Arts Collective, which is one of the artist groups that we worked with for this pavement painting project, and this one came from a previous pavement painting project they did in 2021 as part of a Minneapolis transportation study. So I'll just quickly read the steps because I think they were really important to our work. So this was a community idea to paint the crosswalk, not the city's idea. We had a multi-year funded relationship with a community organization. We really tried to have very frequent touch points monthly over the last 1.5 years. We went through many iterations of crosswalk art design, as I will share, to make sure that everybody's guidelines and interests were represented. And then a celebration with some community painting days. And then sort of the next steps will be the results from a crosswalk study that Dr. Morris will talk about, and just some of the next steps in the project. So this is really, I'll spend a little bit of time on the background. One of the successes of making this project happen was that it was a community idea, and it was done through a funded contract or relationship with Little Earth Residents Association. So I'll share a little bit of background about the two main partners, Little Earth Residents Association and the Native Youth Arts Collective. And then also just a little bit about, like, why did the city do a transportation study in this neighborhood? Why did the health department get involved, and what were the goals? So for those of you who aren't from Minneapolis, Little Earth is a housing and urban development subsidized housing complex in urban Minneapolis, and it is home to about 1,000 residents who represent 38 tribal affiliations. 99% of the residents identify as Native, and 50% of them are under the age of 21. And so the Little Earth Residents Association is that nonprofit that provides engagement and representation with HUD, but also serves as a community center with comprehensive holistic programming for residents and also individual support. And it is the Native Youth Arts Collective is one of the Little Earth Residents Association's programs. So Native Youth Arts Collective is the artist group that we worked with on this project. And they are a group of Native teens and young adults. They live in the neighborhood. And there are two primary programs that they operate in. We worked with both. One is a culture bearers training program that supports older youth artists who are 21 plus, who have some formal training. And then the younger youth training program are youth ages 14 to 21, and they are involved in weekly programming at Little Earth. And so background again about, like, why were we on these neighborhood streets and why was the city involved? So in 2020, the neighborhood experienced an increase in crime and speeding. And so they requested support from the city to address their concerns. And so that resulted in the Department of Public Works working directly with the Little Earth Residents Association and many other partners on a demonstration project and this 18th Avenue and Little Earth transportation study that you can see the cover for here on the right, and that is available on the city's website. And so that they really stepped in, they did this study, and they made some changes to the right-of-way in an effort to improve safety. And the study also includes some preferred concept layouts for a permanent reconstruction project on 3 neighborhood streets. But as you might imagine in the planning world, you know, this plan was done in, say, 2023, but the reconstruction is not going to happen until after 2028. So the health department stepped in to fill the gap with some additional temporary projects. So we got the CDC grant for 5 years, and we wrote Little Earth into our work, the Native Youth Arts Collective into our grant, to work on physical activity through community design. And so we had a contract with them for the last 2 years. And this idea to paint the crosswalk and to do some of the other work on the street really came from this ongoing relationship between Little Earth and the city and the health department. And you'll see I've showed the 3 engagement themes here at the bottom, and we'll just highlight the one in the middle. Community representation really was super important to the community, and they saw that in art and specifically, as well as safety, both personal and traffic safety. So here is just the, again, I think it was really important to engage continuously over the last 2 years in the project. So I just want to highlight a brief timeline of kind of those touch points for us. It started with a kickoff with many partners, including Public Works, the Park Board contact, the Public Art Department, and the staff at Little Earth Residents Association. Then we moved to do some community walks with staff and residents, and you'll see the photo on the top right is some of the staff at Lyra, along with the health department staff, who are going on a community walk. That was the inspiration point for the idea to paint the crosswalk. And then sort of led into the fall, we decided to apply for a public art permit, and we're fortunate that the city does have an official permit process and department like Chris was talking about. And then we realized, whoopsies, that it would be helpful to have sort of a research and evaluation component with some of the work. So MnDOT awarded a grant to the University of Minnesota, and the crosswalk was one field site for the research study. You can't really do much pavement painting during the winter. So we worked with the Native Youth Arts Collective on some other boards using Indigenous animals and appropriate or really important teachings, the 7 grandfather teachings. And so the youth worked on these wayfinding signs that illustrate animals and values that were important to them. And then later, those grandfather teachings and the animals were used as stencils on the crosswalk. The Arts Commission approved this demonstration project in April, and then we did more community walks with the research team in the early summer to make sure everybody was on the same page, and then celebrated with community painting days at the end of the summer. One thing that I wanted to just highlight again, I think the 3 goals of the whole project that we really agreed to at the kickoff were to improve pedestrian safety along this 18th Avenue South by making temporary visible changes, to increase community representation through public art and placemaking, and to engage the Little Earth community throughout the project. And all of those were really important as we went through the project. I also just wanted for other folks on the call, that it was important to connect the demonstration project and the engagement and implementation to some of the big city plans that exist. That was a really useful tool. And so you can see, the city is committed to visibility and safety at intersections and mid-block crossings through their transportation action plan. And the crosswalk was at a mid-block location. Their Vision Zero action plan highlights disparities in traffic deaths among Native American communities. So this neighborhood is really important to look at safety, and as well as crosswalk visibility and contracting with local community partners. And then finally, the neighborhood transportation study that had those 3 engagement themes, in particular, safety and community representation. So here are lots of photos, and I think this, one of the takeaways here is this took a year. So from July 2024 to August 2025, there was a lot of really important back and forth between the health department, the community, the public art department, the public works engineers and design people, as well as the research team. And so we were really in this place of how do we meet the artist's vision, community representation, city and state design requirements, as well as research study goals. So lots of players. And some of you can probably already see why there were some changes that were made. And so this was maybe a little bit unique because our process wasn't, we decided we were going to have public art, we put out an RFP and we got an artist to do the art. It was really, it started with sort of a different origin where we were partnering with the community to improve physical activity, and it was their idea. And so we had a unique opportunity to work with the artists and to pay for their time and their expertise to develop something that was going to work for everybody, and also make sure hopefully that it was in line with the MUTCD. So left to right in the top, Vision 1 was the original design that was done after that community walk in July 2024. You can see as pretty quickly designed. Version 2, we removed the words that could have been perceived as an advertisement or promotional, even though the intent from the community was really wayfinding. Versions 3 and 4 were done kind of in the fall as we were getting into that public art permit process. They chose the colors because they are significant. They represent the 4 directions, red, black, yellow, and white for the Native American community. And we needed, Public Works also requested that we only paint between the white continental blocks and not sort of alongside it. You can see that there was interest in adding a bump out for pedestrian safety. And so in one, it's with blocks. It ended up being with bollards, but you can see then the artist depiction showing a little bit of a bump out with some of the 7 grandfather teachings stenciled in version 4. Moving to the bottom, version 5. So this was after the project was approved by the Arts Commission. The artist submitted a final rendering of the art, and you can see that it was version 5 had the stencils that were done representing florals and 7 grandfather teachings in between the white continental blocks and also inside the bollards. And then version 6 is interesting, though that's actually not a rendering. So what happened was there were some community painting days that were really great for other portions of the demonstration project. It was super hot. It was like 100 degrees. They had to cancel one of the days. So they ran out of time to fully paint the crosswalk, but it actually ended up being a good thing. You can see that they were starting to put some of the stencils down. They actually had some of the preschool kids and staff come out to help. There was a preschool on one side of this crosswalk, which was one reason it was really important for safe crossing for parents and families. But we realized pretty quickly that what had been, we ran out of time, and so it was incomplete. It was not really what had been submitted to the city, and the stencils were ultimately not going to be very visible for the research study that was going to be looking at, how do people with low vision approach a crosswalk. So we worked with the research team and the artists and proposed doing some color blocks in between the white continental blocks with the stencils on top. And so you can see version 7 was in August. We kind of had to submit another version through the permit process. And then you'll see there was one final change that actually happened the day of the crosswalk painting. Where the color inside the bump out that was supposed to be sort of a yellow cream, it mirrored some of the demonstration project farther down the street. We ended up changing it to blue out of concern that it might be confusing or confused with the white continental block. So it takes a while, like longer than you think it's going to take, with Minnesota winters, with the back and forth, but you'll see in a minute the final design, and I think we're really proud of it. So this is just to reiterate that all the partners involved had different priorities, but they all sort of had this intersection of really valuing the safety of the people in the community and the pedestrians. So, I think there are multiple priorities, but at the end of the day, the community really cared about the representation and the engagement in the project. The city really cared about the sort of the permits and the policies and the street design guide. And the research team was really concerned with how are we going to study this with people with low vision. And so this is just wanted to share a few photos of the final result from the community painting days. I mentioned, this was the street demonstration had 3 locations along the same street. So on the left, they refreshed some paintings along a no parking lane along the park. We inserted some bollards, and there are some city planters that are there that get moved out in the summer. The photo in the middle was an intersection painting that was done by the Native Youth Arts Collective and the community. And then on the right, you'll see some of the research team and I spent 5 or 6 hours actually one Sunday with the Native Youth Arts Collective artists and lead artists painting the crosswalk. And there we are in process, changing that bollard or the inside the bump out from cream to blue. It was so hot but I think it really it was super important for everybody to be there together, painting, the researchers, the health department who was coordinating it, or myself, and the youth and the leads. So here's just some fun before and afters. So just for the research study purposes too, here's the crosswalk before anything was added on the left. It is mid-block. Here's the crosswalk. After we put in the safety bollards, there was some more data collected about pedestrian and driver behavior before painting. And then here is the final result of the crosswalk with all of the painting and the bollards. It may be a little bit hard to see, but you can, in some of the blue sections there, that's where those 7 grandfather teaching animals are placed. And so the research goes on, and I will end there and hand it over to Nicole. If I can here, stop sharing.
So you can see my slide, yes? Yeah, okay. I think you can all see it. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to share what we're doing on the research side. I want to acknowledge my co-PIs on this research study, so Dr. Curtis Craig and Dr. Gordon Legg. Gordon is a professor in the Department of Psychology and is a world-renowned researcher in low vision wayfinding research. And so we were really excited to have him agree to work on us with this study. So I'm going to go over a few things that Ethan discussed, but hopefully this will help solidify some of the things that he had mentioned. So previously, the decorative crossings have not been supported under FHWA. And really the concern was that they are devoid of retroreflective properties. They diminish the efficacy of the transverse markings, degrade contrast. There's concern about distraction and lack of uniformity. Of course, the U in the MUTCD is uniformity, right? So we really want uniform traffic control devices. And with the art, we really lose a lot of uniformity. But of course, there's been a lot of demand for these colorful crosswalk art treatments for all the reasons that have been mentioned previously. And so this has been putting a lot of pressure. And ultimately, many communities have been moving forward without the support of FHWA and without proper guidance under the MUTCD because there's such demand. So this has allowed us to have some opportunities to actually study crosswalk art because there have been so many implementations that have been done outside of the guidance and leading up to this latest version of the MUTCD. So here's a publication under Bloomberg Philanthropies, and they looked at a number of different locations that had been treated with crosswalk art and found a variety of different benefits to safety at these locations of reducing crashes involving pedestrians, reducing injuries, overall crash reductions, decreasing pedestrian vehicle conflicts, increasing yielding, and decreasing pedestrian walk signal violations when these are being applied at signalized intersections. So leading, all of that work, then FHWA then provided new guidance under MUTCD 11th edition. So essentially, they have said, yes, you can use aesthetic surface treatments. They want these in between transverse lines. And as you're going to see, this is a real challenge for communities like Minneapolis, who pretty much exclusively use continental style markings. And so being within compliance really requires either kind of milling those things up or immediately being outside of compliance, or the guidance, I should say. So some of the standards here, they should not confuse pedestrians with vision disability. So that's a challenge to know what would confuse. The colors need to be acceptable. No advertisements, as we saw in one of the renderings. And we don't want to encourage any interaction of pedestrians with a pattern. So this example here, I'm sure in very good spirit, the idea is very sweet. Let's put a hopscotch pattern in the crosswalk art. But of course, you're going to be increasing exposure time and interaction of pedestrians in the crosswalk, and that's really going to be counter to safety. We shouldn't be degrading crosswalk contrast markings. You don't want to be mistaken for any traffic control. So this is the image here where we have a lot of icons using X's and arrows and things that really shouldn't be used, putting bicycle imagery into the crosswalk. There's just a lot of challenges and problems with what has been done with this top image that would not be allowed under this guidance. So there are quite a bit of rules around this, but still within the guidance, it leaves a huge opportunity. Art is art. And so that's kind of what's wonderful about it, but makes it really challenging. Going back to this first bullet about, you know, how are we interacting with pedestrians with vision disabilities? So the final thing in some of the FAQ is that jurisdictions have the responsibility to be ensuring that aesthetic surface treatments are safe. They're not interfering, distracting from, obscuring any traffic control devices. And they want to make sure that these treatments also encourage road users not to interact with the treatments. So if an agency does decide to pursue artistic surface applications, there is guidance that they really need to be ensuring that those with disabilities don't have any issue interacting with that. So that really leads to the research study with my research lab and Minnesota DOT. What are the risks to pedestrians with visual disabilities? And one of the challenges is there's actually not a lot of research on crosswalk markings in general. So you would assume we already know, you know, is transverse or continental style marking better? There's actually not a lot of research on that. So that's a challenge to know, is this guidance of putting the art in between the transverse lines better because transverse lines are better? That's actually not very well studied. So that's sort of one of our first questions is, does transverse or continental style markings with incorporated art, is that better for pedestrians with visual impairment? Additionally, if you have low vision, contrast lines and the thickness of lines, so as we're thinking about frequency and contrast, the thickness of the lines may be very important, but that also isn't well studied. And what characteristics of the art may support or impair safe crossings. To some of the concerns about driver distraction, unsafe interactions of drivers and pedestrians if drivers are distracted by the crosswalk art, we want to look at that as well. And then finally, any unintended consequences. So of course, again, we don't want people spending more time in the crosswalk interacting with the art. And does it change any of their decision making? One of the challenges of pedestrians feeling more supported by infrastructure is sometimes they will become riskier in terms of walking out into a crosswalk before drivers are fully yielding. So I wanted to note a couple of things here about visual impairment. The first is visual impairment is really not a single type of condition. And so there's many different types of conditions that can lead to visual impairment. So this becomes a real challenge as we're trying to look at pedestrians with visual impairment. There's not just one type, there's a whole gradation of different diseases, different levels of impairment that really may influence performance. So as we're thinking about this, there's a couple of important things to note. So sort of the range of your visual angle. So we have the greatest amount of detail in our vision in our central vision. And so we call this sort of our phobia. We have a lot of color perception and a lot of detail, and that's where we have our greatest acuity. And as you get out into the further areas of your vision and to that periphery, we have a loss of acuity just naturally. If you have full vision, you're going to have low acuity in your peripheral vision. So this becomes a challenge if you have a central vision loss because you've lost that part of your visual field that has the greatest detail, and you're having to rely on parts of your vision that are lacking in receptors, they're lacking in cortical reception. So there's a lot of challenges there. Versus you may have age-related macular degeneration, which is one of the most common types of visual impairment. So we have that here in this peripheral field loss. And then, of course, you can have a diabetic retinopathy. So that's one of these central field losses, and then total vision loss. So obviously, then we're getting into what we would consider legal blindness. So those with visual impairment, so this would apply to people with very low vision or that are what we would consider legally blind. There's a procedure that they're trained in and adapt to cross crosswalks. And so the first goal is locating the crosswalk. So again, this is a concern. Are there confusion points about what's a crosswalk and where the crosswalk is? If they have low vision and the crosswalk has been modified in a way that would make that detection difficult. The next is aligning themselves to the crosswalk. And so this is where some of these tactile surfaces at the crosswalk becomes very important to help them align themselves appropriately. And then they need to make that final decision to cross. And then as they're crossing, maintain their alignment while crossing. So again, modifying the visual characteristics of the crosswalk could be quite detrimental to maintaining proper alignment as they're crossing the crosswalk. So these are some of the concerns that we would have. A couple other things to note if you are thinking about where are pedestrians looking as they're crossing a crosswalk or crossing a roadway. And so pedestrians with full vision, normal vision, they're going to spend very little time, so you can see here on the top, little time looking actually at the road surface. So we can determine this through eye tracking studies where you affix pedestrians with eye trackers and you look at where they're spending their time. So they're going to be looking more up and around, really thinking about their destination of where they're headed, versus someone with low vision is going to spend far more time looking at the road surface, looking at the lines to assist them, and far less time looking around. Finally, a big consideration as we're thinking about crosswalk art is surface level changes are a big concern for pedestrians with low vision or blind pedestrians. The big reason for this is as you see different types of contrast changes, this could indicate a curb, it could indicate a crack that's a tripping hazard, sort of a toe stubber. And if you have age-related macular degeneration, again, the most common type of visual impairment that we would see of low vision pedestrians, you're often going to have other comorbidities like mobility challenges where tripping becomes a real challenge. And so they're going to be really paying special attention for looking for any cues in the surface that there might be a tripping hazard, and then also looking for cues in the contrasting to help keep their orientation as they're crossing. So we have to be careful that we are not artificially confusing a pedestrian into thinking that there is a surface change, or potentially occluding the fact that there is a surface level change as they're getting to something like a curb or going over a crack. So Dr. Curtis Craig had worked really hard kind of synthesizing all of this. And so again, kind of in recap, FHWA has some concerns about aesthetic crosswalk treatments. Again, this idea that it may distract drivers as they're operating their vehicle. Could it distract approaching drivers if a pedestrian is standing there? Are they paying more attention to the art than the pedestrian? And is the pedestrian distracted, or are they crossing in a way that is maladaptive? But as we are looking to the literature, we do see that there are some genuine concerns of pedestrians with low vision. We want to make sure that they are not hindered or their crossing patterns made worse because they are already going to be slower to decide to cross and complete crossings than a pedestrian with normal vision. They are more likely to attend to the ground right in front of them. So as we're changing the road surface of the ground in front of them, making sure that we are not having unintended consequences with that, making them more nervous or less able to detect those elevation changes or holes, and how are we changing their ability to use those lines. And Curtis has mocked up some crosswalks here, some of the ways that he's sort of thinking about how we may want to be using contrast as a component in our art to make sure that the markings are really standing off. So we have a few studies that are going to be layered in here. And so going through a field study and different simulation, but I'm going to jump to what we've done in the field study here of collecting data in baseline. We have our cameras up, the bump outs went out. And so we have video data and crossing data there. And then as we get to the aesthetic crosswalk treatment, we were able to continue to cross ourselves and get that video data from the aesthetic crosswalk. And so what you can see here is pretty exciting. So some of you may not have seen these results, but in baseline, we were around 34% on average of drivers yielding to our research team as we were doing these crossings. Once those bollards went in, we jumped to 70% of driver yielding. And then once the art went in, so I have this kind of light blue, this is where that initial attempt of the painting was done. And then when it turns pink, this is when the final treatment was done. And then the blue at the very end, these are that we've come back just this month. So we had a couple of month gap, and now we've come back to see what is performance still like. So this is really exciting to see that we have increased driver yielding with those bollards. Not a lot of lift with the art, but quite honestly, it's very difficult to get yielding much higher than 70%. So I think we're going to be reaching a ceiling effect. But the most important thing here is, I think we have some evidence with this case study that the concern that drivers are going to be distracted and less likely to notice a pedestrian with this art, we do not see supported in this data. We see the opposite. So going to be looking at driver behavior between natural pedestrians. One of the challenges with this, because it's a mid-block crossing and it is not between two signalized intersections, pedestrians do not need to use this crosswalk. There's nothing illegal about crossing outside of the crosswalk, and we do see quite a few pedestrians crossing outside. So looking at their usage, time to cross, their exposure, we're also seeing quite a bit of wrong way driving. This is a one-way street, so looking at any potential changes there. We'll be doing an online simulated study. We can use some software from a researcher at Johns Hopkins that was previously Gordon Legg's graduate student. So we can modify a lot of these different factors and modify the imagery to simulate different types of visual impairment. And our overarching goal as we're working our way through these series of experiments is really to provide some guidance about the expected risk of aesthetic markings, provide guidance about what is the best approaches, and giving some other general information about where do we think we should be looking next about research questions about aesthetic crosswalk arts. So that's the end of my talk. So I'm happy to turn this back over for some discussion.
Great. Paul's going to lead us through the Q&A, but I just wanted to say what a well-rounded presentation, right? A little bit for everybody. We got the technical stuff, we got the community benefits and some level of stress work, and then this final research piece. It's like that just really great set of presentations. So with that, Paul, why don't you lead us in some Q&A? We got just a couple minutes, but we've got a few good questions lined up. So thanks.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you all to our presenters here. Excellent job today. Really appreciate the input on that. I'm going to jump to the last question from Eric here. And I think the group can read that. So the question, is that if the understanding is that the art on the pavement slows vehicles down, could we consider that a traffic control device? And I guess, Ethan, maybe I would call on you here. Is this something where, we'd want to reflect on a technical definition of a traffic control device? I don't know, anything you care to say about that?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know how quite to answer it. In the sense of uniformity, I think that's kind of what uniformity, making sure that things are clear, that our traffic control devices is kind of what's revolving around this. Even in the first question with the Sean Duffy memo that he had, I think it was just, he was trying to call to a sense of uniformity and making sure that these things are following the MUTCD, the new one, just because there are a lot of designs out there that don't quite meet that. Navigating that is pretty tough, and as we put together our tech memo, we're noticing that, but I think it'll be doable. So I don't know. I mean, you could think about using it as a traffic control device, but I don't know how to. That would be more of a federal discussion, right? And how if they did qualify it as a traffic control device, what would you do with it? And I mean, I don't think you could ever use other colors from the MUTCD that are already defined for another traffic control device either. So it's a tough one.
No, fair enough. I wonder if maybe there's just a nomenclature question there about, we could all recognize the effectiveness of those, but maybe just referring to it something other than a traffic control device, so we're not confusing it with the standard guidance, for example.
And I think that's kind of the route that it's taken, right? It's just making sure that it's not that. And it's interesting. This is definitely, like how I kind of put the history of it all. We're in pretty uncharted territory for the most part. Have been for a while, but hopefully we can strive to make these things work and become part of the uniform nature of traffic control devices and having that fit in there. So,
well, that's why we're here, right? Because this is research and we're learning as we go. You did touch briefly on the input from the Secretary of Transportation here, so I don't know if we'll say too much more about that, but maybe just the last question that was submitted, during Chris's presentation. But if anybody wants to just touch on that, concerns about surface friction and wet pavements here. I guess anything else we'd want to say about, kind of how that fits into the research, or other resources that folks contemplating these installations would want to look for.
I could say something, at least for MnDOT, for the crosswalk design, for adding friction in general, right? I know that this has been a discussion we've had in the past, and we actually added a section to our Minnesota it's the provisions for traffic or MnDOT provisions for pavement marking operations tech memo. And within it, we actually do try to address that, saying that, we should really be putting skid resistant aggregate in messages that have any situation where deceleration, turning movements, or pedestrian bicyclist traffic is occurring. So we're doing our best to get that out there when we can. And yeah, trying to address that, because it is a valid concern. I mean, you walk over something that doesn't have any aggregate in it, and it's noticeably slippery, particularly for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists, right? So yeah, we try to address that in our memo, and we have definitely made a bigger effort to put in those type of markings in those locations.
Good. Well, that's great to hear, Ethan, that there is some guidance out there. So maybe that's something we can communicate to our participants here today as well. And of course, hate to be reminded, but snow and ice season is just around the corner here. So something we'll all be facing soon. So
yeah.
All right. I didn't see any other questions come in, and I know we're kind of coming up against time here. So Lisa, I can turn it back to you to close us out.
Great. Well, again, thanks everybody. I think this was a great set of presentations, and as you can see, the reports aren't quite done yet, so watch for the finished versions of those. But we thought it was a good chance to let people see what's in the works and how we're going about studying some of these things. So thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you all at another CTS webinar.